so I'm going to be looking all over the place today. Thank you everyone for sticking around. I know the last time was always kind of there's not a lot of people, but there's actually a lot of people here. So I changed my title a little bit. The current title for today is When I Left, I Felt Like I Betrayed Them. Latina Women Navigate the Implications of a College Education. And so the central empirical question of this study is, what are the implications of a college education? So a college education as a source of pursuing upward mobility for Latinas. And to answer this empirical question, the methods that I used were qualitative. So I conducted interviews. With 11 undergraduate Latinas. They only had to meet 2 requirements. They had to self-identify as Latina and be enrolled in a 4-year university. However, all my participants had many of the same, shared many of the same identity categories. At the time of the interview, they all self-identified as heterosexual, were of working class background, so that means that their parents were working class. Many of their parents worked on manually intensive jobs. They were all first-generation college students, meaning that they were the first in their families to go to college. And as I mentioned earlier, they had immigrant parents with low levels of education. And they also, at the time of the interview, they lived outside their parents' homes. So to go to college, they lived with roommates or housemates. All these benefits, so they experience mobility, like they can go in and out of their houses without like the parents being like, where are you, what time are you coming home? They learn new skills, like how to work financial aid, how to sign a lease. They learn also new knowledge in classes, specifically about them, but also about like any classes that they're taking. And also, their feminist consciousness becomes heightened. I can't really say that word, but it becomes enhanced. So what I'm not trying to argue is that Latinas, once they get to college, they gain a feminist consciousness. That's not what I'm trying to argue, because actually a lot of women of color feminists and Chicana feminists have specifically talked about how women of color learn feminism through their mothers, so at home, and that's not what I'm trying to argue. I'm just saying that it becomes enhanced, so they learn the jargon They also learn new feminist understandings of gender and sexuality. So while they're at school, they're like, all these cool things are happening, or all these things that are good for them. They also experience they feel like they're sort of in a contradiction, because their parents were like, go to school, have a better life, I don't want you to work with your hands. But then when they get accepted, their parents are like, they either say don't leave me, I want you to be close to home, or they'll say, yeah, go to college. But regardless if they say their parents are like, don't leave me or stay close to home, the daughters end up feeling guilty or betrayed. And so I kept seeing that, and I became really, really interested in that. And so I argue it's because of gender, racial, sexualized, and class expectations of daughters' expectations, that specifically daughters in an immigrant parents, they have immigrant Latina or Latino parents, that's why they feel guilty and betrayed. So these are some of the messages that the Latinas were hearing. I won't read all of it, but this is kind of what their parents would say when they were like, oh, go to school. So the first person, Aurora, says, my mother always pushed education. She always set herself and her family as an example. Her family stopped sending her to school at a very young age. My parents used to say, why would you want to struggle? Why are you struggling? You don't have to work as hard. So as I was mentioning earlier, this is very similar. All participants talked about their parents, or some people had single mothers that their parent or parents would say, go to school because I want you to have the hard life that I had. And so they hear these messages, right? And so they're like, okay, I'm gonna go to school. And so when they do get accepted, this is kind of some of the responses that my participants told me. They said, my parents were like, you shouldn't go away, you're the youngest. I had to stay home and take care of them, and I didn't agree with it. Similarly, Denise says that her parents said she said it was difficult because I was the first person to leave. When I first came up here to college, my mother told me that I didn't love her and that I was trying to escape from her when I left. So what I argue is that feminismo, so I don't know if some of you have heard about that, but feminismo is pretty much a cultural value And there's many facets to feminismo, but a main one is that Latinas should put the needs of the family before their own. So I argue that feminismo plays a role in this because daughters are expected to stay close to their parents to help. However, the second participant, Denise, highlights how feminismo and gender are also intersect because, I think I'm talking about the wrong slide, sorry. Okay, so this is where the gender comes into play. So as you can see, Caroline says, my parents didn't expect me to leave. My two brothers, well, my oldest brother left because he had a baby. They didn't expect me to leave because I don't have kids or other responsibilities but school. Similarly, well, Caroline then explains, I think they felt betrayed because they thought since I was their only daughter, I was going to stay and help around the house. So what I'm trying to say is, like, it's not only feminismo that comes into play in class, it's also gender, because it's like a gender expectation for daughters to take care of their families in certain ways, and one of these ways being to continue reproducing the family. So then that way when they leave, it's kind of like they're queering family or kinship ties. And so it's like, so gender plays a role in them feeling guilty and as if they betrayed their parents, but then gender also continues intersecting with like upward mobility because once they get to college, they gain these new understandings of gender and sexuality. So one way is here Caroline is saying, I just like my freedom up there at college. That is what I really enjoy. I don't feel guilty with what I do because nobody's there to shame me. My parents are always questioning when I go out, like, who are you going out with? What time are you going to be back? And I don't miss that. So again, they experience more mobility and they don't have to feel guilty about, about things that they want to do. And then there was also, participants really talked about them learning new ideas about sexuality as well. So Aurora says, once I got to college, I understood. I took more classes, I talked to more people with different backgrounds and different perspectives than going to the doctor. I think that before it was very traditional where it was like, you have to have sex with the man you're going to marry, just things like that. I think once I understood what sex was and I understood that the real purpose of it, which to me is just not procreation, it is more for pleasure. A woman should be able to have pleasure out of sex, not just because she has to have children. So Aurora no longer believes that sex should only occur for reproduction, a traditional way of understanding heterosexual women's sexuality. Instead, as you can see here, she now embraces a feminist belief that the, quote, real purpose, end quote, should be for pleasure. As Aurora highlights, Latina girls and women are often taught that sexual activity should only occur in marriage for reproductive purposes. Latino families often frame sex is negative and dangerous and teach their daughters to refrain from engaging in sexual activity. For Aurora, new understandings of sexuality foster her sense of sexual subjectivity. Aurora feels entitled to and worthy of sexual pleasure. So as you can see, these new ideas are beneficial for the daughters, but then, well, that's not totally the way it's supposed to look. But what that slide says is like, they learn these new feminist understandings and they're good for them, right? But then what ends up happening, ironically, is that they now don't see eye to eye with how their parents and their families think that like gender and sexuality should be like for themselves. So what it ends up happening is that it leads to tension between mothers and daughters. And so specifically what happens is that daughters other their mothers. And so some of you might be familiar with this term. So othering is when a person or group of people construct their identity as different from another person's or another group, but specifically the way that they're constructing it is like they're better and superior, and it results in further marginalization. So daughters, like these new understandings ironically led to two forms of othering. So one was they othered the desires of their mothers. So in this instance, in Liliana, she says, I want to be in a relationship where he understands me, where he is woke. Someone who I don't have to explain things to, someone who understands their privileges, People always say you end up with someone like your dad, but I can't end up with someone like my dad. I love my dad, but not down to be with him. He needs to realize his own privilege and be open to changes that are happening. And so Liliana finds her father's way of thinking undesirable, and she is completely entitled to feel that way. Liliana describes how her father polices her mother, it's not reflective of his privileges, but in this process, by marking her father's machismo undesirable, she is also marking her mother's desires as undesirable. And another way that participants did this was the way that they saw like the ideal way to become mothers. So Denise says, I want to be financially stable. She's talking about like when she wants to have kids. I want to be financially stable. I feel like it would be financially irresponsible for me to have a child if I am not. I will when I am financially stable. Similarly, Lola says, kids, I don't know right now because I am not financially stable. No kids right now, maybe later when I am financially stable. Although Denise and Lola are entitled to have children when they want, the notions that women should become mothers only when they are financially responsible effectively others their mothers. Denise's mother had children at the age, and so throughout the interview she talks about, so this person, Denise, she talks about how her mom had kids at a really young age, and so did Lola's mom. So Denise and Lola's mothers had children at early ages and have always been a member of the working class. So they've always been members of the working class. The idea that women should wait to have children when they are financially responsible is not a realistic belief for working class immigrant women who may never become financially stable, because that's just not possible for some people, right? So my concluding thoughts is that, I have a lot of concluding thoughts, but that in pursuing upward mobility, specifically through higher education, it could, it's beneficial sometimes, but it could also be painful, specifically through gender and sexuality. And so for my dissertation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hopefully conduct an ethnographic study where I see where these Latinas and feminist understandings of gender and sexuality. And also I want to say that this study is not reflective of the experiences of all Latinas that go to college, because there was only 11 participants, but also I think not everyone has those identities, right? Because some Latinas don't have parents. For Latinas that don't identify as heterosexual, there will be differences, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's pretty much